Hello and welcome to Try to Understand. I'm Mark Paris, my pronouns are he, him, his, and some other important identities I hold are that I am native Chamorro to the island of Guam, and I'm a recently out gay man. I am joined by my co-facilitator, Katrina Klein.
Hi, pronouns are she or hers. Some of the identities that are important to me are I'm mixed race, half Filipino, half German, also bisexual, and yeah, that's pretty much. Also cis woman.
Awesome, thank you. For the month of April, we will be celebrating APIDA Heritage Month through a series of discussions on what it means to be Asian American. Today, we'll be discussing East and Southeast Asian American identities with our panelists. Panelists, if you are comfortable, will you please introduce yourselves with your names, pronouns, and other important identities you want to share? Afterwards, we will begin asking questions for our discussion. So if Jessica, would you like to start?
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently, well actually all of you already know, I'm currently a staff member in APACC, which is pretty awesome. And I guess some identities that are important to me is that I'm a first generation student, identify as Korean American, and yeah.
Kaorny, would you like to go next?
My name is Kaorny. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a Cambodian American cis woman who's able-bodied, and I was raised by refugees, and I think that's pretty dope. So.
Thank you. Jeannie, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Jeannie. I use she, her, hers. I'm cis. I'm bi. I'm usually identify as Chinese American, but that's not technically true. That's about it.
Thank you. Emme, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Emme. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I identify as a first generation student, and I'm also Vietnamese American. Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Thank you to our panelists. Now let's begin today's try session. The first question that we wanted to ask for this topic is, what does APIDA mean to you? And if you feel comfortable, you can also tell us what APIDA means.
Are we going in any like particular order or?
In any particular order.
Okay, well, I guess I can start. Oh, this is so awkward. Well, I mean, APIDA stands for Asian Pacific Islander Desi American. And I guess like for me, what APIDA means is just like this really big umbrella term that encompasses an identity that is really big to me, especially as a daughter of immigrants, like being Asian, like for me at least, like being East Asian Korean, but also like being born in America. So that part and like how that plays in my identity, I don't know. It means a lot, and I think it means a lot to a lot of people that I'm close to and like the communities that I'm a part of. So, yeah.
Similar to her definition, I definitely grew up thinking the word APIDA was very general and an umbrella term. Unfortunately, I feel like I don't have the same identification with the word in being APIDA opposed to being Cambodian American. My parents were very big on separating the whole umbrella identity because they just felt it didn't justify our culture and the differences we formalized typical idea of what people think APIDA is. So it's more so just a thing that I fill out on a piece of paper because I have no other place to say that I'm Cambodian or Southeast. So.
For me, I think the term APIDA recognizes both my Asian identity and also my American identity, although the term is still pretty broad, so it doesn't, similar to Kaorny, it doesn't really justify like my Vietnamese side just because it's very broad and most Asian cultures are very different from another. So even though it's broad, it's very, I wouldn't say it's limiting, but like it also like groups us all together, even though we may not share similar practices and traditions.
For me, APIDA stands for something that I don't know if I could actually define just based on region, because the difference of being Asian in Asia is very different than being Asian in America, but even then, that's also region dependent. So it's this grouping of trying to form a community that hasn't really been able to find another one otherwise.
Awesome, thank you. Also, I just posted it in the group chat, but moving forward, let's respond in the order of Jessica, Kaorny, Jeannie, and Emme for the sake of convenience. On to our next question. What does your identity mean to you? What are parts of it that you love and what are parts of it that you don't necessarily love?
That's a loaded question, Leggett. I think, oh gosh, what does identity mean to me? I think identity means a lot of different things, especially depending on like what identity we're talking about exactly. I don't know. It like this is a really simple answer, but it's just like the way that I identify, and I feel like that's something that I've definitely learned a lot more about during college, and I think it's something that I continue to learn about. But I think I don't know. I think I love I don't know. I think like what I love and what I hate changes. Like when I was little, I really hated the idea of being like Asian, and I thought it was like the worst thing ever. And like there are a lot of things that I want to change, but I think being older, I've learned to love that I am Asian and like all the things that it carries. But I think that I hate or I don't hate, but I dislike and I am really disappointed by I think like societal expectations of the identities that I hold and how that like really like confines me within those boundaries and doesn't allow me to be who I want to be sometimes. So.
For me personally, similar to Jessica, I had a really hard time accepting the fact that I was Asian. I have this like really weird story about when I was younger. I thought I was Mexican because the only people I would see that looked like me was Dora, and she had bangs and brown hair and black hair, or brown, like brown eyes, brown hair, brown skin. And so that was the first thing I associated myself with because no one ever sat me down and told me I was Cambodian. No one ever was like, surprise, you're Asian. I was just with my parents and I wasn't very aware of that. And then as I began to get older, I started to realize I was a lot different in how I was raised and like who I was friends with and what I believed in. And I think that's when I finally realized my identity, especially my ethnicity and culture, have a lot to do with myself, the person I've developed into. So I think being Cambodian is one of the biggest parts of me that I've learned to embrace because I used to lie about it, and I think it's really nice that I'm coming to terms with it. One of the things I really love is that we're a culture that said it's like unfortunately is rooted in a lot of trauma and fear, but I'm really glad to be part of a group that feels very special and close to me, especially, and I think the best part about being Cambodian is like going to a different space, and then the moment you like see another Cambodian or can tell if someone's Cambodian, it feels like you're connecting with someone that finally gets what you're getting, and that's specifically for Cambodian Americans. But it's just really nice because there's only like 250,000 of us in the US. So it's just so crazy to think about. But one of the things I didn't really enjoy growing up was how my parents were still very rooted in the idea of sexist ideals and where women and like men belong, stayed rooted from like arranged marriage. And then the colorism, because I knew I was brown before I would know I was Asian, and that was not only apparent in my peers, but in like in my culture, it's very normal to like look at someone and be like, "Damn, you're dark," and like that like messed me up, and that's something I really want to push forward and change. It was a long answer. I'm so sorry.
For me, my Asian and like Chinese identity for me means quite a bit. Having grown up like in California, surrounded by like other APIDA folk, and then moving to a pretty white dominated area, I never realized like the amount of discrimination or how different I could feel from other people just based off of race and ethnicity alone. And for me, it's something I'm proud of and I enjoy, and like I love the food and I love having such a large community because like at least within my family, like I have so many like aunties and uncles, you know, and for the parts that I don't particularly love, it's like kind of based around what is considered normal for like a Chinese woman, like the whole familial balance of you have to respect your elders no matter what. And that kind of personally made me feel like I had some like authority issues. And along with that, like with my mom and my aunts and whatnot, like weight was such a big issue growing up, and I don't love the focus on appearance as much. Like how I was always praised as a kid for being light skinned. I don't love that.
For me, my identity, I don't know. I feel like my identity means a lot of things to me, but in like many different ways. If that makes sense. Like I feel like my identity was always like a something that everyone can always overlook at, and I think it's just growing up in Colorado. It was always just me and being that one Asian student in like that one grade. And then so like after a while I feel like I overlooked my identity as a PETA too. So that was very interesting. And then it wasn't until I got into like middle school, one of my my teacher, she was just pointing me out and she was like, "Oh, like can we all separate into our own race and ethnicity?" And I realized I was the only one standing in like the Asian identifying category. And then she pointed me out in front of the whole class and she was like, "Oh, like did any of you ever felt this alone?" And I was like, "Oh, I like didn't necessarily felt like I was alone this whole time, but it's something that I've always encountered in class. So it's something that I always have forgotten that I'm like one of the minorities in this as a minority group, but I'm also a minority of that minority group as well." And then so like I think that was very hard. I think that was like the realization when I realized there wasn't a lot of people that I could relate to. And then like growing up, like everything slowly started unraveling. Like I would tell them how my parents don't say I love you or something, or like there's not much physical affection. And then a lot of my classmates would look at me and say, "Oh, like is that some kind of neglection? Like should we report it?" And I was like, "No, like my parents like feed me and everything. Like I don't think like that's neglection. Like it's not abuse. It's just how they are." But like to them it sounds like very different, and they were just like, "What are you talking about? Like that's not normal." Like my parents would take off a day to go to school or something, and they would like come to the principal's office to check up on me, and I was like, "No, like my parents would come, like they'll be worried, but like I don't know, they trust the teachers in teaching me and they trust the school, so it's not like they don't care, it's just like they trust in the education system." And so I think like having like those different experiences and like when coming to like a crowd setting and sharing them, there's like a lot of differences that not a lot of people would accept or like would look different. So I think with that it comes a lot of memories like that where I feel very isolated. from my peers. But then like on some kind, I really do love the like, community that I built, and like everyone's so different that I'm constantly learning. And then my parents, as like refugees as well from the Vietnam War, I feel like such pride learning that what they have overcome in order to be here. So I feel like that pride, I'm very proud of them, and I'm very grateful for my experience and my identities as well. So there's that too.
Thank you. So our next question is, what are your experiences with the model minority myth? And for, in case anybody doesn't know, the model minority myth is a stereotype that broadly paints the Asian American community as the ideal minority for their obedience, work ethic, and following but not leading potential. This myth puts a burden on Asian American students to excel in academics, leading to feelings of inadequacy or lack of support from teachers and guardians. This myth also helps degrade other people of color by highlighting that they are not the model minority in the US.
Oh gosh, I think the model minority myth, that's another loaded topic. But I think it holds so many like stereotypes and expectations. But also I think it's kind of, at least for me, like in my personal experience, like where that's rooted from, at least like when it comes to working hard, especially in school and getting good grades. My parents, when they like moved to the US, I think this happens in a lot of a lot of East Asian countries in particular, like where if you do well in school, you get into a good college and then you'll get a good job, and that like determines your success, and therefore that success is happiness. And I think it's something that I struggle with because I don't know, I like school is the one thing that I'm good at, so I continue to try to work hard at it. But also like in my head, in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, like am I just like playing out that model minority myth, or am I like working hard? But then also like it's a struggle to be working hard, but then people to view you as a model minority, not someone who is working hard in general. I think like no matter what, like if I do work hard, it's still gonna be, I'm still gonna be viewed as an Asian woman, not just a person working hard. So yeah.
So personally, for me, I feel that I didn't have very many associations with the model minority myth. I'm not completely certain why. But I have had people assume that I'd be better at things because I am Asian. But I can't think of anything super significant because I kind of feel like I was treated the opposite. I got called London Tipton a lot. And so I personally don't think people really associated that with me, or I didn't feel anything with that personally. Yeah, that's my answer. I'm sorry.
I feel like the model minority myth, it was and is definitely a tool that's used to take different races and pit them against one another. And growing up, school was never particularly difficult for me. And so now looking back, I kind of wonder how much that impacted me because it was just expected of me. And like everyone knows like the whole issue with like gifted children and how like they don't know how to study now and stuff like that. And I feel like that definitely applies. I'd rather put something off until the very last second than actually put in like a ton of work into it. And even recently, I was at a dinner where it was a bunch of APIDA folk and one white identifying person, and she had said, well, of course that class is easy for you, you're Asian, and just could not comprehend why that was an issue at first. And after some explaining, it like clicked, but it kind of brought me back into the reality of like how much people do believe in that.
For me, I think the model minority myth like shows up a lot in like my neighborhood that I grew up in, and like we're like a very low income and there's a lot of people of color here. But in my graduating class, there was like only 143 of us, and I believe like only like 10 of us went to college. And then so when I did choose to college and like stayed in college, because not all of those 10 students continue college, but like when people find out that I'm still in college and I'm almost graduating, I think a lot of my peers like would think, because they sometimes they would come up to me and they would just say, "Oh, it's because you're Asian though. Like you were meant to be like successful from the beginning." And I feel like they don't recognize like the efforts that I put into school too. So, but that's very like similar to what Jessica was saying, and like a lot of my classmates would overlook that I do try my best. Like I do like hard work to get here, but not a lot of them see that, and so they'll make the assumption that, oh, it's because Emmy is Asian. Like she's one of the only Asian like students in our school, so of course she got accepted. And like I think with that, it's like it makes me see where they're coming from, but then I'm also like, no, like I'm also my own individual too. Like I did a lot to get here too. And I think I don't know, I think with that I struggle with around my neighborhood too.
Awesome, thank you all. So our follow-up question to that is like, what steps do you think can be taken to undo the model minority myth or move forward from it?
I wish I had the answers. You know, I like I this is really sad to say, but like when it comes to things like this, I think it's not gonna I don't think there are like specific steps that we can take, and then by the end of it we know that the model minority myth isn't gonna exist. I think sadly it's always gonna exist in some sort of form. But hopefully like in terms of like maybe making it something that's not something that people use as a truth or view as a truth. I just think I don't like for me personally, like I'm not saying that my parents didn't raise me right or whatever. I think my parents did a great job of raising me. And I think parents in general do a great job, but I know for me when I raise my children, like I don't know. I just want them to live their best lives and to not feel like they have to, I don't know, like do STEM or things like that. Because I know for my parents, like that was a big thing. They're like, oh, like we went to School of Mines and we did engineering. So like, why don't you? And I ended up majoring in something that works with people and they hate it. So I think like being able to like tell other APIDA folks or just like my own children that it's okay for them to do what they want, and that like I mean if they want to do STEM they can, but they don't have to feel forced to be that model minority. But also I think it's also a conversation of like um just what it I don't even know how to word this. So like I did this presentation on the model minority myth and anti-Blackness, and I think like that's another big part of it in terms of like, oh, well, you don't want to be like blank, so you need to do this. But again, that's like a whole other conversation to have. But I think even just like this try is really good, having this conversation with other folks and then being able to educate other people and be like, yo, I'm really bad at math and I don't know why you expect me to be good at it. And here's why. But that's all I have, at least.
Once again, that answer was wonderful. I don't, um, no, I completely agree. I don't think there will be any way to completely eradicate the issue, obviously. I feel like it's always going to play a huge role regarding just like race and ethnicity and colorism. It's always going to play a huge role in American society. I don't see any like extreme changes happening anytime soon. Um, but yeah, once again, I think the only thing I would do to kind of change it and do what I can personally as an individual is just try to educate and then make sure that those around me and the people I love know they shouldn't have to uphold that. And I think the idea of model minority myth, I personally feel, unfortunately, it also needs to start within the community. because I do know there's a lot of PETA folk who actually enjoy being the model minority, and I feel like that's where a lot of older generations they want to be the best, even no matter what context. And I feel like that's something that we need to work on as an APIDA community and understanding why it's wrong. Because if we aren't able to understand it, I feel like it's not. It's I just think we should start with us is what I'm saying. But yeah.
I definitely agree. Like within the APIDA community, it's something that has to be addressed, but even further, like I am also of the belief that in a lot of APIDA folk being passively like being passive in politics, we kind of allow for a cycle to continue to some extent. Like realistically, economically, in America, Asians make the closest to the white dollar. And if we continue to just passively allow this to happen, there's no other way to bring folks up as well. So I think it's something that like they play into one another. And if we only address within our community, we can't, not to say help, but like make space for other voices as well.
Yeah, and I agree with everyone else too. And I think with this, I also hope that like everyone like sees the individual as themselves. Like I feel like now a lot of people like just look at themselves and just be like, oh yeah, like I'm very proud of you just because you're very smart. Like not correlating it with like your race or anything. But I do know like a lot of things come with your race and privileges and like money and whatnot. But then I also think about like, oh, like sometimes those aren't related. Like just look at me for who I am. I don't know. That's what I think.
Thank you. So moving forward, our next question is, what are your experiences with the perpetual foreigner myth? And for those of you who may not know, the perpetual foreigner myth is a stereotype that disallows Asian Americans from truly being American, despite the amount of time that they or their families have lived in the US. This myth is best represented in the repeated question, where are you from? No, where are you really from?
That's definitely one of my least favorite questions ever. I think, oh gosh, um, I don't even know. It's really interesting because my mom, she immigrated over when she was 13. And so she worked, and my dad too, like my mom and dad worked their butts off to even be able to kind of like, to be able to speak English and to be able to do all these things and own a business. But yeah, like when, like for example, there's, I don't know, like when people see my parents, like my mom specifically, like in grocery stores and stuff, there are some folks in general that will just like talk to my mom slower and they'll be like, do you understand? And it's like, yo, my mom knows English. Like, buddy, don't even, like, my mom's probably 10 times smarter than you. Like, I don't know why you're talking to her. Like, she's stupid or something. I think that's another thing. Like, foreigners are viewed as like stupid or dumb. Or like even when people view my last name, they'll ask me that question. They're like, oh, like, where are you from? I'm like, I was born in Colorado. They're like, oh, like, no, like, where are you actually from? I'm like, Denver. And they're like, no, like, actually. I'm like, I don't know what you mean. They're like, well, what's your heritage? And so I don't know, like, I think there are times where like it's obvious that I'm not white, I would say. And I don't know, I think I feel that a lot, especially at CSU, where a good handful of like APIDA identifying students are international students. So I think there are some people that assume that I am also an international student just because I am Asian. And then like sometimes when I speak fluent English, people are really surprised. They're like, oh, your English is really good. I'm like, yeah, I know. I was born in America. So, but yeah.
For me, I remember there was like this one distinct memory I had, and I was in 6th grade, and I lived on a military base, and I remember I got dropped off, and my friend, her mom, spoke to my mom was like, your daughter speaks such good English. I can still hear the accent, but like her English is great. And my mom was like, what the she was like, we didn't understand because we were like, she goes to school with your child. We live on a US military base and she was born in Colorado and we're in the middle of Kansas. And you're telling me that my daughter has great English with an accent when the only accent she has is an American one. And so I remember at that moment I was like, why would she say that about me? Like, what? Like, I didn't register it. And now that I'm older, I think it's kind of made me realize that I'm always going to be viewed as different just because I'm not part of the majority group in this nation. But in terms of being asked, do I speak English? That's very often. And when it comes to the idea of being a professional foreigner and people asking me where I'm from, I feel like opposed to being asked where I'm from, people just kind of throw that on me. I don't think I've ever gotten to say on like what I actually am. And usually the people who do end up asking me that are people who are genuine and use the right terminology. But I know my parents struggled with it a lot, and I know being a professional foreigner is very difficult for them because they were kind of thrown into America after a whole bunch of trauma and stuff. So like the last thing they wanted to do was speak out because they were scared if they did talk or admit that they were a foreigner. My dad would like, so one of the reasons why I'm not fluent in my language, my home language for my parents, is my parents never wanted to teach us because they didn't want us to get beat up in school for having an accent like they did. And so it's like things like that where I realize it's instilled in me, this whole myth. It's literally it's one of the reasons why I don't feel close to my culture, and it really sucks, and it makes me feel horrible to know that they had an effect on my parents and stopped them from feeling okay with their culture and where they're from. So.
My first thought is like this memory I have when I first like was in Colorado for a while. My stepdad is white and we had the cops called on us because they thought he had kidnapped me from China. I wish I was kidding about that, but it's like one of those things where having lived in a white dominated area and an area that had like high diversity, I didn't realize how not normal it was for a really long time. And I remember being like, oh, well, like when being a kid and being like, oh, my mom's from Taiwan, and there people like asking Thailand, and I'm like, no. And like just understanding how vast Asia is and how much people in America don't know about Asia at all. And it was just hard generally.
For me, I've experienced almost like everything that everybody was saying in America, but then I also thought about like my experiences in Vietnam, and I wasn't sure if that was also like as a perpetual foreigner, but in Vietnam, because I don't know how that makes sense, but like I don't know. I remember like every experience I've had for visiting Vietnam, like a lot of my relatives, even like people in the community, like when they hear me speak Vietnamese, they'll just they'll say like the same thing, but like in Vietnamese. So they're gonna say, "Oh wow, like you speak really good Vietnamese for being born in America," and I'm like, well, yeah, like my parents speak Vietnamese. Like, what do you mean? Or like sometimes I go to like restaurants or go and shop something, they're just saying, oh, like, do you need something? And I'm like, no, I just need like chips or something. They're like, do you know what you need? And I was like, yeah, chips. And then, I don't know, I feel like they make me act like I'm really dumb too. So I feel like there's that like two barriers that I talked about earlier where like I don't fit in with like Americans or Asians because I'm too Americanized for them. But then I also don't fit into the American culture because I look Asian and I do have like my Asian cultures that will never make me assimilate to like full American. And so I was thinking about that and how like, I don't know, like I feel like being a perpetual foreigner, like that whole myth doesn't just exist in America, but then it also exists in Vietnam when I go and visit. And I think with that, it just makes me feel like I'm not accepted anywhere because of my two dual identities. So that's what I was thinking about when that came along.
Awesome. So our next question is, what is your response, or what do you wish you could say to the question, where are you really from?
What would I say? I don't know. I think I've gotten to the point where like I don't really give in to the question. I just go, oh, I'm from Colorado. Yeah, I was born in Denver. And like I think the tone of my voice that I use really like catches people off guard, and they'll be like, oh, did I ask something wrong? And then I don't know if anyone's seen this video, but there's this video about like this man coming up to this like APIDA identifying woman, and so he's like, oh, like, where are you from? She's like, oh, I'm from like California. And he's like, oh, like, where are you really from? And so he eventually gets like, oh, like, well, what's your heritage? Like, and then she explains it. He's like, oh, that's so cool. Like, and he like, you know, like if I tell people I'm Korean, they go, oh my gosh, I love Korean barbecue. I love K-pop. I'm like, cool. And like at the end of the video, it's funny because the lady, I think about doing this sometimes where like you ask that question back at the person. So you go, oh, like, where are you from? And they're like, oh, like, you know, especially if it's like someone that identifies as white and you're like, no, where are you really from? And they're like, they don't get asked that question and they're like, oh, okay, I guess maybe I shouldn't do that. So yeah, I don't know, that's my answer at least.
Since I've gone into college, my response is a lot different than what it used to be. And then what it used to be is what I want to respond now, when like I was a little bit more like mean. Now that I'm older, I just realized I don't have the time or energy. So if anyone ever really asks me, where are you from? I don't think this is suggested, but the first thing I ask is, are you genuinely curious, or are you going to be kind of racist? And okay, that's horrible, but it's something for me to acknowledge and to like get out the way most of the time, unless it's someone who like is completely random. I don't give into that. They're completely random. I just walk away. But I feel like a lot of people don't know how to ask, and I've gotten a little bit better at giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially when they end up being like young children and stuff, because when I work around kids, they do ask me that, and it's a concept I do have to break down for them, and just so they understand, or I just give them an answer that's kind of like to shoo them off. So yeah, I try to respond, and I do say I'm Cambodian, but back in the day, what I actually want to say is when people at my like high school be like, where are you really from? I'd be like, where the fuck are you from? And then they would stop talking. And that was just the way that I always got people to shut up, because I have a really hard time. Like, I already had an identity crisis like 2 years before that. I don't need you to like help me with that. I'm struggling already. So that's how I want to respond still. But I've gotten to be a little nicer. I don't know.
I guess normally I do just say I'm from California and then San Francisco. And I definitely think when I was younger, I used to just be like, well, I'm Chinese, and then just go leave it at that. But I honestly can't think of the last time I was asked, nor can I think of my answer. I don't know if I actually even answered.
Oh, for me, I don't know. I think like ever since I got to college, I usually just say, "What do you mean by where am I from?" And then I think a lot of people would start catching on because they don't want to offend me, so they're like, "Oh, like, what is your ethnicity?" And like they'll start catching on from there. But then there's some really dumb people who like when I do say that, they're just like, "What do you mean where are you from?" And I'm like, "What do you mean where are you from?" And I don't know. I just do like I'm not really aggressive, so I was like, what do you mean, where are you from? Like, I think I just fight back and forth with them with like the same question, and hopefully they'll catch on because I have big faith in people. Yeah. But then like I remember in high school, I if people did ask me where am I from, I would just tell them that I'm Vietnamese and my parents are from Vietnam. And then so I think with that, like they would either assume that I am from Vietnam because I came with them, or I was born here, and then I would have to explain to them why I'm so good at English with that then. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm born here, and that's why I'm good with English. So I think it ties in with being a perpetual foreigner with that too.
Thank you. Um, have you ever had somebody try to guess your ethnicity, and how did you respond to that?
So if we're being honest, I have my fair share with like dating apps and stuff. And so obviously like with a lot of those apps, I know, just like with a lot of those apps, it's appearance based first. So like what people view like your photos and stuff. So I'll have like people be like, or like people in general, like in person too, people will be like, wait, let me guess. I'm like, what are you guessing? And they're like, you're Japanese, aren't you? I'd be like, what makes you think I'm Japanese? And they're like, oh, it's just like, you know? And I go, no, I don't know actually. So just like, yeah, I've had a lot of people guess my ethnicity, or like if I tell people that I'm Korean, they ask me, oh, are you North Korean or South Korean? Which is like, even like as a little kid, I knew that was not plausible, especially in the United States. Um, but I even had my teacher ask me that in high school, actually. Okay. But yeah, I don't know. There are plenty of people that try to guess my ethnicity and they're always wrong, without a doubt.
I feel like my whole life has been people guessing it and me guessing it at the like seriously, like it was to the point where I was like, am I even me? Like, okay, but in the terms of that, it's I've gotten a whole spectrum of things to the point where like most of the people who do guess my ethnicity, weirdly enough, aren't people my age. They tend to be older individuals or people of the same culture that they want to like that they're a part of. And so I've gone from the point where like, are you from like El Salvador? Are you half black? Are you like native island? Like native? Are you islander? It honestly depended a lot on the region too, because I lived in places like Oklahoma and stuff where reservations were huge. Um, and I've also had like Latinx folk like speak to me in Spanish and assume that I'm gonna speak it back. So when people do kind of guess my ethnicity, I feel like I personally have the knowledge of knowing if they genuinely mean it. And like they do think I identify that versus just doing it off of blatant notions of nothing. Um, so with that, I usually just tell them, and I'm like, oh, I'm not, I'm sorry. Because I'm like, and even with dating apps and stuff, like, that's a whole other story. Like, they don't exist in my head right now though, because I hate them. But most of the time it is older individuals, and they're usually the ones who are just genuinely curious, especially because a lot of people don't register Asian with brown. I know that's a big thing, but they don't. And so when they see brown, they're just like, oh, she must be another blank identifying person that looks kind of Asian. So it's weird. But yeah.
I definitely agree. Like, I feel like most people my age I haven't gotten since before middle school, the like trying to guess my ethnicity. I feel like most of the time when it happens, I'm with my dad, and he speaks like 9 Asian languages. So normally they just assume I'm whatever, like I come from whatever ethnicity the language comes from. And I'm like, oh dear, yeah, no, I don't know that. I'm sorry.
For me, I don't get this question a lot. And I think it's because if people know my last name, it's like one of the majority Vietnamese names, so I don't get this. But because of this, I get assumed I'm Vietnamese, which I guess I should be happy that they assume I'm Vietnamese already. So I think with this question, yeah, like especially in class, like everyone knows my last name is Tran, and if they have any other Vietnamese friends, they know that like Nguyen and Tran is like the most prominent Vietnamese last name. So I don't get this assumption a lot, but like I get because of so like I get assumed for being Vietnamese already. So I guess I should be appreciative because of that. But yeah.
Thanks. So our next question is, have you ever been exoticized or fetishized because of your ethnicity? How did you feel? How did you respond, or how do you wish?
Everyone already knows, like, don't get me started on that topic because we had a whole chai about that. But yeah, I have, and thanks, Kaorny. Oh gosh, how do I even start with this question? First answer is yes, I have been exoticized and fetishized because I am Korean, but also mainly because I'm Asian. How did I feel? You know, I think at first I didn't really think much of it when I was like younger, but then once again with the dating apps and stuff, it became a lot more like it happened a lot more. And I didn't feel good. I think at the same time I felt confused because it was like, oh, well, like this person is saying that I'm like really beautiful and pretty, but also it's because I am like blank. Because people will be like, oh, you're like an Asian goddess. Oh my gosh, like I've never been with an Asian girl before. It's like, I'm not like something to check off your bucket list. And I'm like, I don't know, it just like makes me very mad. And I feel like the way that I responded in the past is like I just didn't, but the way that I respond now is just like I think I try to disprove what people expect of me. So people expect a lot of APIDA identifying, like at least for Korean women, I know it's expected that we're like submissive or whatever, I guess, but I'm definitely just like not submissive, and I will like fight back at someone who does do that to me. So I'm gonna stop because I could go on forever. So
Yes. Oh my god, I had a whole answer in my head. Oh, so the approaches I typically get aren't more so like you're Asian, therefore I'm clicking on you. Okay, yeah, actually I'm lying. That's exactly what it is. But um the way it gets approached to me is a little bit is it's weird. They'd be like, damn, you look like you'd like be the perfect person to make mixed babies with. And I'll be like, or or it'd be like something along the lines of them being like, oh, like you look cute, what kind of food can you make? And it's associated with my culture, so it's like I've never had that kind of food before. um so yes, it's very apparent. I don't enjoy it. I wasn't really able to recognize it when I was younger at all, actually. Just and I grew up in a very diverse high school, so it was very normal to like see interracial relationships. So it would never register to me that like there was just so many colors flying around. Like it didn't. I couldn't tell until I came to Fort Collins. Um, but then I also realized it's not a Fort Collins thing, or it's just an American thing, because I know when I'd go on dating apps in Italy, uh, a lot like the first messages I would get is like, "Oh, you're very like they called it Asiatic," and like I would only get swiped, and that would be the first message I got. So, in ways I would respond to make them feel stupid, because that just gives me a superiority complex, and I'm like, they're like, "Oh, you're so beautiful," and I'm like, "I love pasta." Like you're like I'd be like, oh my god, your Venice River is so pretty. Have you been? And it was really nice to kind of throw it back, because if you're gonna ask dumb questions, you're gonna get dumb jokes back, and that's how I deal with it.
That is a big mood. And like for me personally, because I am queer too, it's like the fetishization of like the intersectionality as well. And yeah, I don't have any other answers other than basically just being mean back.
I don't have any answer for this. I don't think I really have no relationship or anything beforehand. So like, I don't think I've ever been in this situation where someone has fetishized me like this before. So yeah, I think all my friends are pretty mellow with me. I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks. So our next question will be, selected pieces of Asian culture have been adopted into mainstream US culture. What are your feelings with this sudden acceptance of Asian culture?
I think it's good, but also like, I don't know. I know that, for example, like boba, like like Asian foods are viewed as like super trendy now. Like everyone's like getting hot pot now and Korean barbecue, and it's just like that's really great. It's really great. Like thumbs up to that. But I feel like if the people who are consuming that food, if their attitudes don't align with their love for the food that they have for like APIDA folks, then I'm just like not about it. Because if you're seriously about to just like, I don't know, like eat all these foods and then not be aware of like APIDA folks, I don't know, does that even make any sense? I don't, because I think especially with nowadays with like the coronavirus going around, people are saying like, oh well, it's because of like those weird things that like Chinese folks eat. It's like, well, you've been eating Panda Express your entire life, so that's Chinese food. But I don't know. It's, I'm happy about it, but also I'm not, because it used to be my little secret, and now everyone's at the boba shops, and I just like, am like Korean barbecue places, and I don't know. I'm indifferent.
So for me personally, even though I'm 20 years old, I love and have a great fascination with the early 2000s. And in the early 2000s, a lot of selected pieces of Asian culture were selected and very appropriated, like chopsticks in the hair and everyone wearing kimonos and Gwen Stefani being Gwen Stefani. It's a different story. But when it comes to that, I feel like I have grown up so much around it, and now that I'm older, the first thing with this question that I related it to was the fact that we're not the only culture, because I still see this very similarly, especially with Black culture, just being appropriated, and now it's all of a sudden cool because POC aren't actually like being, I don't know, just the fact that because white individuals make it cool, it just is really unfortunate. Kind of, yeah, I'm kind of indifferent too, because it's really nice to see people around me finally understand the things that I grew up with and enjoy it with me. But then again, it's kind of like, so when am I going to stop being a trend? And and I feel like it just shows a lot about being like, okay, if you think this is so cool, why are we considered trends, but like stuff like from Europe, like Italy and Sweden and stuff, those are just staples. And I don't understand why they don't understand that you're making us temporary just by doing that. I don't like that. So
I think that there's very much a picking and choosing what comes into popular culture based from Asian cultures. And a lot of things that kind of come and become trendy are attributed to other things that but may have basis in Asian cultures, whether or not it's like a major thing, like the like shy fingers and like the way like TikTok e-boys have a lot of like clothing inspiration from like K-pop and J-pop and stuff like that. And when it comes to like food and clothing items, a lot of the times I would like to compare it to gentrification, because there's this like almost boom in like a financial status and what it means to be wearing these things or owning these things. Like the fact that I can buy kimchi from King Supers, but it's $10 for about this much kimchi. And it's something that genuinely frustrates me a lot. Like when I think about kimonos and how Forever 21 was selling these kimonos, but they weren't. They were just thin cardigans. And I think that it's definitely a power play in using these things as trends rather than actual pieces of cultural significance. And it kind of is belittling, and I absolutely fucking hate it.
I agree. I think like one thing from like Vietnamese cultures is like outside, and then like a lot of people like they necessarily like don't wear it the traditional way, and a lot of them think, oh, like this is like very pretty, like I'll just wear it kind of thing, but they don't know the history behind it. And I think if they had just a little bit appreciation or even knew like the history behind it, I think I would be like, okay, not okay, but like more like understanding of where they're coming from. But the fact that they're able to wear it and also not get criticized for it is so very offensive, because I was like, oh, like I don't know, outside is like very special to us, especially in for women's in Vietnam, just because you wear it on like a special occasion, like when you're about to get married. There's like a whole separate outfit you're supposed to wear for that, and then you're supposed to wear like things that like very personal to you that you can feel empowering in. And then like a lot of people would just say, oh no, like that's a weird thing, like guys can wear dresses too. And I'm like, no, it's not just guys, it's like its own culture that no one would take like the time to understand. And I think that goes for a lot of things that in many like people of colors like culture that are taken away, like they're not understand, but they're used for their trendiness. And after they are used for their trendiness, they just get tossed out. Like, oh, it was just because it was trendy. Now it's not important wear, and then we can toss it. So I think with that, it's just very not satisfied. Like, oh, you know.
Thanks, Ed. I know we're coming close to the end of this try session, but I do want to ask a couple more questions before we formally close. So our next question is, Asia is the largest continent in the world and is home to many different cultures, but popular media depicts only a certain group when claiming Asian representation. Why do you think Asians in US media are primarily portrayed as East Asian in general? So that would be Korean, Japanese, or Chinese.
I I don't know how to. I think so again there's that like model minority myth sort of thing, and in terms of Asian folks, especially East Asian folks, so Japanese, Korean, Chinese folks, we're white adjacent pretty much in terms of like we are light skinned, and I think a part of that plays in it, like that idea of colorism, and just like the fact that I think we're just viewed a lot differently in terms of like I think the way that our country, like Korea, for example, the way that it's developed, like the things that it's popular for, like people are all about it and like people want to show that. But when it comes to, because luckily for me, like I'm able to see representation now, especially for East Asian folks in US media. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can really speak a lot about that for me personally.
I don't know if this is historically correct, but I think it has a lot to do with the first Asian immigrants that have been introduced to in America. So like the Chinese railroad workers, as well as like the Korean War. And then I like think of things as like, and then like with the Japanese internment camps, and all those are very like negative things that like, a lot of our APIDA population experienced. I think because those were the first people they experienced who had Asian heritage, it was just easier to clump that and then put all these new colors they see who live near that country, just throw it right under them. I also do feel like it has a lot to do with colorism as well. And the appeal of just people who are lighter skinned. And I know especially for East Asian countries, yeah, similar to the development stuff, they possess a lot of the same qualities and wants in their societies and the ideals that Americans do, such as like not light skin, but like being skinny and like being obedient and listening. And I feel like that's normal to them, so they don't want to differ from that.
For me, I feel like a big part of it is there's already established stereotypes that they can play off of anyways. And when I think about Asians in US media that aren't East Asian, most of the time they're brown, whether that's like Indian or Middle Eastern, whether like, and there are stereotypes around that as well. But for a lot of Americans who have not done much research or have learned a lot about Asian cultures, if you don't even have an awareness of certain people, then showing up in the media and not having any basis, you can't really capitalize off of it as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think along with everyone else, I agree. Like, I think those three specific groups were chosen because of how they look, and colorism like does really play like a big role in, or at least in my culture, that I see a lot. And then so like as long as they're like they fit like your image, like Americans' image of what Asians look like, and the lighter that they are, they like will make you try to look like that. Because I don't know, okay, so this is why I'm going off with this, but I was watching like this Fast and Furious like updates or whatever, and it was like how the actors are doing right now and how like they have families or whatever, and then like it was really cute, and then all of a sudden I found out like there was like 3 Vietnamese actors, but they changed their name to like stereotypical like Asian names, like just so they could fit like especially Tokyo Drift. Like inside that movie, there's like at least 3 Vietnamese actors, but they changed their name to like, I just remember it was a Japanese like or a Japanese sounding last name so it could fit into that character. And I thought that was just very interesting how they're still Asian, like Vietnamese and Japanese are Asians, but they would mold their like the directors and whatnot, they would like mold their identities to fit into like the mainstream identities and like what portrays as like the mainstream Asian, just so it could fit into everyone's images. So that's why I was saying that earlier, because I was like, oh, like that's just very interesting how you're not Asian enough unless like you fit into like those like stereotyped images that like the dominant society has portrayed and imagined already.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that the word colorism has been used a lot. So just to clarify, colorism is prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a darker skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. And with that, have you ever experienced, what have you experienced regarding colorism within the Asian community?
Again, for me, so I identify as Korean, and I'm definitely one of the more pale people like in all of my friend groups. And I think, I don't know, like when I was growing up, my mom and my grandma, they definitely, especially my grandma who flew over from Korea, like would tell me all the time to not stay in the sun too long because it's like not good for my skin. And then my grandmas are literally like the ajumas who like wear like the long like sleeves that cover their arms, and they wear like the gloves and like the visors that go on the front. So I personally haven't experienced colorism. I think I've experienced like people wanting to enforce that light skin ideal, but I personally have not faced colorism because I am so light skinned.
So this reminds me of a story. So I was asking my dad about like his arranged marriage experience because they never really talked about it, and I all of a sudden decided to like ask him. And they were telling me that one of the reasons they chose my mom, even though she was like in a higher socioeconomic status, the reason why they gave her to my father, who was lower, was because she was dark. Well, wild. And I was like, what the hell? And it was really weird to see because my mom is one of the lightest Cambodian women I know. But growing up, it just was always emphasized that I should look like my mom and that I get my poor look from my dad because he is very dark skinned. And like I remember I would play outside and me and my sister would take baths together, and no matter how hot it was outside, my grandma would always put it on the highest temperature so she could try to scrub the dark off of me, because even though we were like, she was very poor, she didn't want to look poor, and it was all very apparent based. And I just would remember like trying to steal my mom's whitening cream and like trying to like only use the hottest temperature, and I would only be able to use like towels because loofahs didn't only exfoliated, it didn't take off the they refer to me as like toast, where you can like scrape off the burnt bits, but that's not how skin works. um but yeah, it was just always being told that I was like dark, and because I was dark I was poor and ugly. And so growing up, that's why I didn't want to identify as like Asian when I was younger, because I was like, if I tell people I'm like from Latin America or like I'm from like the islands, at least they're not going to get mad at me for being brown. And so that's why I also had a really hard time identifying with that too, because I wasn't like my mom and I wasn't what my grandparents wanted me to be. So where else do I have to go with something I can't control? So yeah.
I had a fairly similar experience to Jessica. Like my mom also wears the visors, and it was like really embarrassing when I was a kid. She'd drop me off, and she'd be in the car with it on. And I remember like being like doused in sunscreen, and they were like, "You can't get dark." And for me, like it feels like I come from a place of privilege when talking about colorism, because I definitely am. And it also kind of like, for me personally, played into like how I saw myself, like me in the winter versus me in the summer, like which one I preferred. And like now I've like learned and become more okay with myself, and now I don't really care. But I can definitely feel my family like judging me when I come back darker.
For me, I don't know, like in like my Vietnamese church and like in like my friend group and whatnot, I wouldn't say that I'm darker, but I am like tanner than most Asians. And so with them, I don't feel like a lot of colorism with them. But like at my church, I do see like a lot of my teachers, they would prefer like the light skin or lighter skin Vietnamese, just because they're like, oh, like Emmy's gonna be dark anyway. So like I remember when we were younger, we were playing tag outside, and some of my teachers would say, oh, like Emmy can go out and play tag with like some other people, but like all you should stay here and like just calm down. But I knew like it was because of our color, like the skin of our color too, because I was like, oh, like does that mean that because I'm tanner I can go outside and play because I'm already tan? And then like the students who were lighter skin or paler, they were just able to sit in class and enjoy the AC. And I was like, oh, okay. But then like, I don't know, like so with that, like I feel like the other side of like my identity where I'm like tanner. And so like my family not treats me a little bit different, but then like when I go to Vietnam, I thought that I was tanner than most Vietnamese. But then when I went to like like in Vietnam, like people in Vietnam thought of me as like really, really pale. And then I remembered I was wearing short sleeves. And then one of my grandpa's neighbors came by and was like, wow, your skin is so beautiful, it's so light, like why are you wearing short sleeve, like you should be wearing long sleeve and like preserve that like light skin. And I would just say like, what are you talking about, like I'm tan, or like I don't know what you're trying to say. But then I don't know, like in the more people I started observing in Vietnam, like they all like were with like face mask and like visors and like long sleeves and like shoes. And I was like, bro, like it's so hot out here. It's like 110 degrees and you're all doing this because of how like you want to preserve your skin color. And I think like the way I say it, I was like, this is kind of dumb. And I like told my brother about it in English, and I was like, why are you like trying to make yourself have a heat stroke when it's like 110 degrees just because you want like lighter skin? Like, this is our culture, like you should embrace it. But I didn't realize it was like that big of a deal for them, because I was just like, what? Like, what's wrong? Like, you live near the equator, like you can't change how the sun's gonna affect us. Like, what do you mean? And then so I don't know. And then like I went to the beach because I was really excited to have a beach. And then I like went to the beach, and like my brother and I did not put any like sunscreen on. And then we got really, 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 really dark. And then like I have images if y'all would like, but we got really dark. And then I remember like our whole neighborhood started treating us really different because they forgot that we came America. So then after we got really dark and we weren't light skinned anymore, or like lighter skin, they were just very mean to us. Like some of them, they like tried kidnapping us, and I was like, why are you kidnapping us? I was like, this is crazy. Anyway, Vietnam is a crazy world, and colorism exists in Vietnam, but that's the end line and punchline of the story. Okay, it's toasty.
Well, that was an amazing note to end off that question. To end off this try session, I want to ask this last question. What makes you proud to hold your identity or to be a PIDA?
I think I know Kaorny and Emme mentioned this earlier, but like I think for me, I only really started to appreciate it and be proud of it once I learned about like what my parents went through in order to like just like start a life for me and my siblings here. And also I think it's like super cool that I have something that's different than other people. Like at first I was really scared of it, but now like I have this whole community. Like I get to work at APACC. I'm in like an Asian interest sorority, and I am just like, I love the idea of like multiculturalism and just like diversity and learning about like other like cultures and things like that. And I think, oh, it's Salem. But I think that I've just like sorry, I'm so distracted by the cat. I think I've learned a lot from it, and it's given me a new perspective on things, and just I don't know. I don't think I'm ever not going to be proud of it, especially just to make my parents really happy and proud and stuff, and to show them that like them immigrating over to the States was worth it.
I hold a lot of my identity and pride with my parents. I feel like that's a really big association I have, especially because I was raised by refugees. Because even though one of the reasons I have a lot of pride in being Cambodian American is looking back at all the things that my parents had to endure to give me the life I have. And so when it comes to that, I'm just really proud of my history and seeing that we were able to go through a lot, because I don't know, I never understood the severity of the genocide that happened in Cambodia because my parents never spoke of it. And like my parents went from like not speaking English to 15 to my like dad like earning his master's degree, and we live in like such a great neighborhood, and it's just really, it makes me really appreciative that they loved me so much they were willing to do anything, escape death, and like walk over this is maybe bad, but like the fact that my parents had to walk over dead bodies to get me here just makes me so happy to like know that I'm loved, and that all the generations above me love me so much that they put me here. And so that's something that I really love. And I love that now that I'm here and I am in a place of education and I have all these privileges and opportunities, I'm so excited to share the actual history and beauty that Cambodia has, opposed to having it be masqueraded by all the trauma we went through. And that's all I really want to do. And I feel like we're worth it because we're kind of cool. So like, yeah.
For me, I don't think, like, I am proud of my parents. Like, my dad is a refugee, immigrant parents, whatnot. And, like, of course I am proud of them, but I don't feel necessarily that all of my identity and my pride and that comes from there. I think a lot of it came from the fact that I had to be in order to feel okay with myself. And it's just now a matter of fact for me. And it's something that I wouldn't trade in ever.
I think I'm like very happy that I'm able to experience like my cultures and tradition through my mom just because she came over not being in some way to America. So like she's never learned English at all. So that was one of the reasons why I had to learn Vietnamese. And then because of that, like my Vietnamese raw culture is like very raw and like tangible because of her. And then I'm like, I don't know, I'm very appreciative of her and like I appreciate my privileges as being growing up in America and still being able to hold those like my Vietnamese side that's true like that. And then I don't know, like most of my cousins like who grew up in America, they don't have like they can't speak Vietnamese or like the sound and like the taste of fish sauce is very disgusting to them. And I think like with that, I'm like very appreciative of my parents for like allowing me to acquire that taste in some kind of way. And then I don't know, like my dad, similar to everyone else, like he did come over as like a refugee, like. And then whenever I think about him, I think about how he had to come to the US by himself. And I recently did an interview on him. It kind of went bad because my dad like didn't understand the concept of interviews. But he told me his story. And this was like yesterday. And I was like, what? So he told me he like traveled to so many places. Like he went from like Vietnam to Indonesia. And I was like, this is crazy. And he went to Singapore. And then like from there he like worked a lot of money just to buy like a plane ticket over to the US. And he was just like, yeah, it took so long. I had to like sit on a boat for like 7 days without food and water. And he was like, I went to like refugee camps. And then he was telling me like a lot of things that I never knew of. Like I only knew him as like a refugee, but like learning about his journey and like the hardships that he had to overcome in order to get over here, such as like leaving his family, like almost being starved to death, like not knowing English. Like I was thinking about how like everything that he's given me today, like it was like given to me because he was here. Like he took that first scary step that like my aunts and uncles in Vietnam would have never had the courage to, and now like they're living off of him, which is kind of upsetting to like see. But then like I think about how like my dad really does do a lot for us, and I think that's like where my culture comes out. It's like from my parents to my dad rather than the actual culture. Like it comes from my parents.
Thank you, everyone. But unfortunately, we are out of time, and we have been out of time for a little while. So this concludes our Try to Understand session for today. Our next session will be on Thursday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and we will be covering Desi Americans. We'd like to thank all of you for contributing to the discussion, and we hope to see you again. We'll keep the chat open for those who wish to stick around and for more discussion. And I will also be ending the recording now, so feel free to talk.